I am starting the call. Hi.
Hey.
Hello.
How are you? Let me see. What can I do here? How can I fix this?
We are fired up.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for standing by.
No, of course. We're excited to do this. We just got out of a a homelessness press conference because of some antics our mayor got up to where he basically LARPed as a homeless person for a week.
Oh, right. We actually talked about that.
Oh, shit. No kidding.
Yeah, we talked about that yesterday. How do I get rid of this?
Oh, we can talk more about it. We just finished a press conference in which we were like, this is a solid no. And our community service providers were like, what the hell? Don't do this. How can you come to such bad conclusions?
Awesome. All right. How should I do mods? I need help.
Yeah. So
I'm gonna eat a little bit of chocolate.
Yeah, go for it. You deserve it.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Tell us more. This is fine. Stop worrying. Well, Juan is very small. You can't really see him.
I am very small. It's okay.
Juan is very small.
Yeah, Hassan has a whole small head. I'm just small.
Not how Juan actually is, though. He's a very tall person.
True. Yeah, so basically, over the holidays, our mayor, who was our former Republican Congress member, who got trounced in 18, he decided to go pretend to be a homeless person for a week so that he could, I guess, better inform himself on what that experience is like, completely oblivious of the fact that there's a lot more to... Yes, go ahead.
And if I can just interject, he did so not telling any of the people he spoke with who he was or what he was doing, invited himself into people's encampments, and then was confused why they didn't want some random dude there, and then got shallow information about their experiences and included them on the nightly news. So it's just horrific and disrespectful to the people that he was interacting with. But I think what was worse was the conclusions he came to, which I'll let Juan elaborate on.
Yeah. Basically, it can kind of be boiled down into a couple of points. It's that homelessness is a lifestyle choice. Most, if not all, of these people are on drugs, and that's why they're homeless. That people providing them with food is what encourages them to remain homeless. And that they are just basically shiftless and unmotivated and just don't want to get back into any kind of productive work. So it's as horrifying as it sounds. He then later clarified that, oh, well, I didn't mean that, they were all on drugs. It's just a lot of them are on drugs. And completely oblivious to the fact that you can't go into a neighborhood in this country, I don't care what zip code you live in, where people are not, either addicted to something or use some kind of substance for whatever, either recreation or to cope. The difference is that they have a house and the means to keep a house, and that these people on the street don't. And I think that's just something that's completely lost on him. And he could have learned that without LARPing. All he had to do was actually ask some of the experts in the metro region, some of the people that we literally have on staff about this, reached out to Tri-County Health, and they would have given him an education without him having to do this. He already had a conclusion, and he just wanted to basically do something that would back him coming to this predetermined conclusion, so that he could be like, well, I was there for 7 days, were you? It's just a cheap stunt, and it's really disgusting. And
right. I think another piece that's missing there is that this is clearly a conclusion that's coming to him from constituents of ours who are his neighbors, because I represent the portion of the city where he lives, who write us constantly complaining about the encampments and saying that these are all people who are only here because of drugs. So he absolutely was going for confirmation of his biases, not for deep understanding, or he would have gotten better information. He also, in his statement about this little stunt, said that the reason he did it is because he felt that our service providers were simply going to advance an agenda, which I think is deeply disrespectful to people who commit their lives to trying to address these issues in a compassionate and thoughtful way, in generally without adequate resources. And the only policy proposal that he has since advanced, prior, in addition to previously suggesting a ban on camping, the other proposal that he suggested is a public information campaign to discourage community members from helping the homeless with food or other resources, because he believes that this will force them to just suddenly have the willpower to overcome drug addiction, lack of resources, and trauma. And I think what he doesn't realize is that although most of us have some type of trauma, most of us also have resources to help us deal with that. And that the folks that are in these situations are traumatized, and then they go into a traumatizing experience. And so it's not a question of willpower, but he is Mr. Bootstraps, as one of our service providers that I spoke with said when I was on the phone with her. So nobody's shocked that bootstraps are his answer to this problem, because bootstraps are his answer to every problem. It's extremely disappointing.
I can't imagine taking the time and taking his plan for austerity so far that he went into these homeless encampments and lived as a houseless individual in an attempt to further supplement his own information campaign that he has lived experience. And his conclusion is that this is a matter of self-determination, and that is the reason why he is moving forward with his austerity measures. And that is exactly what you have said. It's incredibly dangerous to take things so far that will ultimately maybe shape one's opinion or further reinforce one's espoused understanding of what homelessness means. And I can't imagine somebody who was in a leadership position taking things so far that they actually have, thinking that this is going to be a bona fide of theirs that can confirm that they have put themselves out in the field in this position, and they will use that to further their own agenda, which is just austerity, and lead one to maybe continue to have this stigma toward homelessness in general that ultimately doesn't do anything but lead to more discrimination or biases whenever you have these interactions with somebody on the street. And yeah, we need more compassion. We need leaders who are taking this matter seriously. And it's a shame that a mayor has put themselves in the position or has walked in the shoes of somebody who is experiencing homelessness just to stand firmly in their own confirmation bias that we should not have to write plans or policies or implement them to help those who are experiencing homelessness. We should further detach ourselves from the plight of homelessness because it is a personal failure, it is a personal issue, and the fact is it's pretty well known it's a systemic issue. It is the failure of capitalism. It is the commodification of housing that makes it so incredibly unaffordable for some who might be dealing with issues related to drug abuse or trauma or medical conditions or whatever the case may be, that makes it even more so necessary to have some sort of social safety net in place, some sort of comprehensive housing policy in place that allows these people to not fall by the wayside, that do have some built-in supplemental programming that allows them to get the help that they need. Because sometimes the system does exhaust itself, and those who are most in need of help do not get it, and they do end up homeless. And the worst part of this all is that you have the mayor leading the charge that we should be upholding austerity instead of assistance, rooted in compassion and an understanding that this is a systemic failure, not a personal one. But I'm
He's not ready for that conversation.
Well, he should be. God damn it!
No, he's pretty committed to his nonsense. He's been in public office for over 30 years and has not done anything about this issue. So it's not surprising that he continues to not do anything about this issue. it is embarrassing.
Yeah, and for anyone else, like if they were a freshman, or just a newbie to public office or public service, generally speaking, I'd be willing to like take a more educational approach. But this guy knows exactly what he's doing, and that's the most disgusting part of it all.
Right.
Yep.
So, are you all
Excellent.
working right now to try to find a way to get him out of office, or?
Well, he got elected at the same time we did, so yeah. So he's got another 3 years. I'm hoping that folks
There
are
are
paying
people
close attention.
calling. There are people calling for his resignation, but he is not going to resign.
Yeah.
But we are trying to work with the broader community
Yes.
on actual solutions that are not austerity. And the good news about our city is that we have a weak mayor system. So he literally only gets to cast a tie-breaking vote.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't even get to vote unless the majority of council comes to a tie in whatever things we decide to pursue. That's the good news about his ability to actually create policy.
Yeah. The bad news is that the way with the current membership in our council, we have a swing vote that has killed things like minimum wage, that killed things like increasing the number of unrelated people that can live in a home from 4 to 6. Policy proposals
so
both
far
modest and
voted.
large. Yeah, and has voted against
Has so
folks.
far voted.
Sorry, go ahead, Coombs.
I was going to say, has so far also voted against initially immigrant protections and immigrant legal defense. We still have more votes to go on that issue, and so that person could change their mind, but we will see.
Yeah. And my hope for this year is that we can pick up a couple of more seats so that we don't have to depend on a swing voter to get good policy done. I think we'll be able to get a lot of work done in 2 years, especially if our liberal colleagues kind of come to the table a little bit. It's been not that easy with working with all of our colleagues. Some of them cast us out from the very beginning. Others have just, I guess, built a habit of kind of trying to box me and Coombs and our good friend Crystal out of conversations, but hoping that changes sooner rather than later, and we need community pressure to make that happen. But
Absolutely.
yeah, and Coombs' name is spelled with 2 O's. Her name is kind of an inside joke on Discord.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it is 2 O's. That the Combs is how some of the people who do not like me or anything I stand for refer to me when they're commenting about me publicly.
All right. There we go.
Yeah. If you read the newspaper comments, thanks Combs. It's like, what?
I am carrying the world to hell in a handbasket single-handedly.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, sorry, I just
Anyway,
realized my lighting is dog shit, but I guess we'll have to do.
So I think the reason we're here is to talk about the fact that, yes, you can run for office as a regular person, and that we need more people who have the lived experiences of the social ills that we face to stand up, to show up, to fight, so that we don't have to continue to live under a failed capitalist system.
Great. And we're happy to take any questions if you kind of want to. I'll go ahead and kind of lead the charge with a few questions. Click that white camera button at the bottom below. Wait.
Yeah, on Discord you can click turn on camera, I think, and it'll stop doing the spinny thing.
Oh, there we go.
Or it'll just show your
That's
icon.
perfect. Okay,
That's very
thank you,
cute.
mods.
You're
No,
welcome.
I just gotta fix this. So we'll do this. Let's see, maybe I can put it like this. There we go. There we go. That's better. And then you have to just look at my stupid little, or cute little
It's adorable.
face.
It's very cute.
Thank you so much. All right, so honestly, I think that we've heard a little bit of Juan's story about how he
Yeah.
decided to finally run for office. It really was a matter of just having a feeling of unrest, right? That led you to start attending city council meetings, right? That's pretty much how it started, if I'm recalling correctly.
Yeah, it was just kind of, we can do so much better. We saw that, our council was trying to prioritize at the time a racetrack. And by that, I mean they were trying to pull out a 28-year long-standing prohibition on subsidizing motor speedways. That is actually in our city charter because they kept asking for this over and over again. It was 18 year, and they ended up getting put into the city charter so that council would stop trying to subsidize a racetrack in the city, and they were yet again trying to repeal a portion of the city charter. So that was one of the things that really got. That's how I think actually we met, Coombs. So
we met as Bernie delegates in 2016, right. But we started actually working together in earnest at that time because I think the real issue we had wasn't just that they were trying to repeal this thing that people had voted in because they didn't want their tax dollars to be spent on nonsense, but it was that they were doing it in a manipulative way with deceptive ballot language. And so we had showed up to say, what the hell are you guys doing here? This is not acceptable. And what we found was that there was even more going on that was extremely disappointing. I think in our second meeting on the racetrack vote, there was a vote to disapprove a permanent supportive housing development that would enable people who were unhoused to get into housing and get the treatment and job training that they needed to better their lives. And our council not only voted that down, but spent the entire meeting demonizing our houseless neighbors and put into place a provision that would make it even harder for service providers to cite any permanent supportive housing by saying that any type of congregate living could not be within 500 feet of schools and all these other types of locations.
Treating them like they're criminals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Literally talked about, actually the guy that I unseated, I remember him talking about, guys who just got out of jail would just be staring down like high school girls. Like it was absolutely disgusting.
Wow.
It was horrific, and so we're really glad that Juan kicked that guy out of office because he also called unhoused people hobos.
Talked about hobo vans.
Talked about the hobo vans that our street outreach team had and was incensed that some folks might not want to get into them. So while Juan's opponent was just like making truly nonsense comments, the guy that I found the need to run against and ultimately kicked out of office said very little in any of the meetings. He was very quiet, but he very reliably sided with anything developers ask, no matter how unreasonable. And even when every other conservative and neoliberal that's deeply committed to some very horrific corporate welfare, even when those folks were like, no, we think this isn't really a good idea, he would still vote for the corporate welfare. And he also was a lobbyist and consultant for developers and advertised openly on his website that he could grease the wheels of the process for development and building. And so I was just like, this is ridiculous. This is corrupt. And no one knows what the hell is happening. So we spent years fighting against all of that, showing up, making noise, trying to draw attention, and ultimately both decided to run against these folks that frankly were clowns and weren't paying attention to community need.
Right, so whether or not you're complacent in this process or you are actively fighting back against any supplemental policies or community-led implementations of policies that would lead to the betterment of community members, there's plenty of reasons why you can unseat somebody who is unfit for this position, Chad. So not something that we want to kind of get deeper into. Somebody asked a specific question about I'm assuming two conservative members of city council. Wait, who was it? A ghost. Is there any hope of Bergen and Gruber getting primaried into oblivion?
Well, it's not. There's no primaries because we have nonpartisan races in the city of Aurora, which
Strong
is
air
also
quotes.
ridiculous. Yeah, I think one of the old union guys in our county that we both know told us that nonpartisan elections have very partisan outcomes, and I will never ever forget that. I think that there's a strong chance of Gruber getting kicked out of office as long as people are working really hard. Bergen had her strongest challenger yet, who outperformed any past challengers by 13 points, which was our friend Brian Lindstrom. But I think her ward is just hard because it is very conservative. It's connected to the rest of the city by a flagpole annexation. So the folks in that ward don't often have a strong connection to what's happening in the rest of the city. And so the issues that folks tend to speak about that are relevant to the rest of the city don't resonate there. And yet they have very high voter turnout comparatively.
Yeah.
Do you see a connection between highly developed or areas that are considered affluent tied to economic enrichment? Maybe there is your fair share of opportunities tied to employment that leads to more conservative voters because you have a lot of community members who might participate in local politics who are considered a little bit more conservative if they are homeowners, if they are a little bit more well-to-do, and they like to have strong representation of conservatives who will look out for their best interests as members of gated communities, as members of homeowner associations, because you do see strong ties to those who are interested in having those who are representing capital interests, and private property owners tend to vote more conservative at a local level because they are mindful of land use decisions that protect and preserve their gated communities, the NIMBYs, if you will. Do you see a strong correlation between NIMBYs and the propensity to vote for conservative represented or city council members?
Yes, in fact.
We already know that, but I just want to, kind of get your perspective on this.
Yeah, so kind of hearkening back to something we mentioned earlier, when we tried to do a temporary increase on the number of unrelated folks that could live in a single household, the vast majority of opposition came from Ward 6, which, as Councilmember Coombs mentioned, is the most affluent part of the city. It is... it's only been part of Aurora for, I think, about 15 years now, Coombs, something like that. I think was when it was annexed in. It would not even be legal to be part of the city at this point if they tried to annex it today, because it wouldn't meet the requirements. And that was actually one of the case examples that got our annexation laws changed. But that's where most of the opposition came from. And the kind of delicious but also sad irony of this whole situation was those folks all live in covenant restricted communities anyway. Mm-hmm. That have basically their HOAs or their Metro District boards would override city code to begin with. So what we were really trying to do would have applied to the older part of the city, Ward 4 has been in the city since the 1970s. Ward 5 not too much further, far behind that. And it would have given folks more options to live in the heart of Aurora. But all the opposition came from Ward 6 for the most part. And it's also important to note that the majority of our council, including the mayor, lives in either Ward 5 or Ward 6 because we have 4 at-large seats. So the original part of Aurora, I should say the core of Aurora, only actually has 4 representatives. Everything else is geared towards the more affluent, part of our community. So.
And this all had to do with the zone change that you were trying to make in
temporary zone change that was actually sponsored by staff. I just took it and ran with it, or suggested by staff, and I took it and ran with it. So yeah.
It's amazing.
We heard today from our
zones. By the way, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, we heard today from our previous housing homelessness program coordinator, that's part of why she left the city, was the aggressive efforts from some of our colleagues to make it harder to get people in housing and to keep people in housing during this pandemic. So it's also damaging to staff morale and our functionality as a city when we have these kinds of horrific policies passed for the purpose of appeasing one part of the city that has access to more power and more representation than the rest of the city. And my ward is part of that. There's a section of my ward that is much more multifamily housing and more working class. But there's a lot of my ward that is folks that, are committed to the same types of policies that the folks in Ward 6 are.
I imagine that it is a little distressing to sit alongside other city council members who are looking to advance the political agendas of the more affluent community members, because they are the ones who might put more money toward local campaigns. They might be working alongside those private developers who are also major proponents of those corporate-backed council members, like the one that you had mentioned, who openly stated that they were the ones greasing the wheels for those private developers, often paving the way for them in maybe expediting the permit process. I don't really know exactly what are the details, but I know that's very similar to what we have here in Los Angeles, where you have crooked council members who kind of work alongside developers to help expedite the process of private development, further enriching those private investors or sectors of a local economy that seem to be quite popular in local politics, and help them stay in their positions of power. But going back to your own plight that you experience in city council, where you are fighting with those almost bad faith council members who are trying to uphold the interests of both private industry, capital, and then individuals who are looking to maintain their current political landscape or their own local decisions that ultimately keep things in place. And by keeping things in place, that often means that those who are most in need of some sort of special interest or special funding to help with issues like affordable housing or like economic development, they are the ones who are left out and excluded, deliberately excluded. And I think that's one of the issues that a lot of people have with, those who would be considered NIMBYs, who do not necessarily care who is excluded from this political process, so long as their agenda is heard and upheld by those specific council members who work at the behest of the rich or the powerful or the affluent members of society.
Yeah, it's pretty appalling, and I'll let Juan talk about this a little bit, but I just want to point out that we really witnessed that in full form when we were going to approve our city's housing policy and our housing study, and there was a survey that our staff did that had, frankly, more input than a lot of the public input processes that our city has undertaken over the years that Juan and I have been involved. But that the council members that represent those areas were concerned about not enough of a voice from developers, from realtors, and from their area of the city that is the most affluent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the things that we heard a lot was, now that the study concluded that we actually need to do things like start up a housing trust fund, and try to preserve as much of our, quote, naturally occurring, unquote, affordable housing as possible. They were very concerned that they didn't have the right kind of outreach, because what they think we need are, executive housing and more luxury options for people, because they think that everyone is just basically renting down because there's not enough of those options. And then if they build more luxury housing, people will rent up if they can afford it. And I don't know about you, but my income has ranged between 70,000 as a household to 150,000. I have never wanted to find ways to spend more money on housing.
Right.
I don't think that most people are concerned about trying to find a way to spend more of their money just to keep a roof over their head. So yeah, it just goes to kind of show you like the results of how your one, campaign finance, but two, how your city districts are drawn and the electoral structure that you have. Because like I said, I think that while things are getting better, we have a certain part of town is way overrepresented. And I'd like to see that change as well. And part of how that changes is people like you and folks in chat, running for office, folks that have, a more conventional kind of lived experience and that are willing to trade in whatever bit of privilege they have to actually, go for it, basically, because we need more regular people in office.
And I would say you are trading in your privilege and comfort. It's not easy.
Yeah.
And I never want to be like, go run for office. It's so cool and awesome. It's exhausting. It's grueling. And then when you get into office, it's even harder. So I want to be realistic because I think a lot of people got me real hyped up that I'm kind of mad at sometimes now.
No, I think it's important to be honest about the process, that it's not, whenever you're doing local politics and you're doing so in your own community, it's not always the way that you envision, local politics on TV. It is working tirelessly and often at low or no pay. And there's not always going to be those bright, shiny moments. You're going to be experiencing a lot of scrutiny, right? Not only from other outside community members, but even with your fellow council members who are diametrically opposed to you, ideologically and politically speaking. So I think that it is very taxing, but I think the point that it's important to drive home that it's worth it, that you are going to be making decisions that could lead to the betterment of your community, and we need people who will step up and kind of fight for the ones who are not able to fight for themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And that in and of itself is probably the most fulfilling part of the job, if I were to guess. Is that
yeah.
It's like, don't, because I saw some comments in chat like, oh, this is actually demotivating. It's like, don't take that away. We're just being real. Like, running for office is hard, and we'll talk about that hopefully here in a few minutes, but it is extremely rewarding. Just every time I'm able to help somebody, whether it's with like, a pothole or like, helping advocate with their HOA, which is a whole kind of complicated part of the law here in Colorado, or helping them stay housed, like it's all worth the struggle. Or like being able to pass campaign finance reform, like that alone was, I think, worth every, bit of any anxiety and stress that I had while running for office and have had so far this year, or last year. It still feels like we're in 2020. I feel like we're just in the 13th month now. But yeah.
True.
Absolutely. And building power with community, even on issues where we lose, is really empowering. So it's not just winning that matters. It's also that building power with community. So I'm not at all saying don't do it and it's not worth it. I'm just saying be realistic with yourself that you make sacrifices. You gain the power to build more power with your community. You make sacrifices. And I think it's almost impossible to really understand until you're there. But I just think that we don't want people to think that it's all winning and all fun. It's also a lot of hard work, and building power is cool and losing sucks at the same time.
Yeah.
So
you're going to take L's, especially if you have, politics that are to the left of the mainstream. But we're getting mainstream, which is good. But you will take L's, and frankly, most people do not win their first race. Coombs and I both got very lucky. We worked hard, but we also got very fortunate that we ran in a time when Trump had activated so many people, and people were actually paying attention to municipal politics. At the same time, like we both ran very grassroots campaigns. Like, I think my background, like I think I told y'all before, I was an architectural designer. I was a BIM manager, so I did architectural design, some IT stuff, and did training and onboarding for folks at a firm downtown. And then when I wasn't there, I was a community activist with an organization that we stood up with Coombs and several of our really good friends called Aurora Residents for Transparency and Transformation. And that came about because of the racetrack, hustle that they were trying to pull on people. And from there, we just basically saw, like Coombs alluded to, there was so much more going on in the city. So we just kind of became an advocacy organization, helped train people on how to testify before council, tried to do a lot of transparency work around elections, so people saw where everyone's money was coming from, and also just tried to raise awareness that local issues really matter. They impact your life daily. And we were also involved in the local Democratic Party, which at the very beginning was a challenge because it was mostly older, much more moderate and more affluent folks. But we managed to bring in a lot of energy. And I want to give mad props to Kristen Mallory Westerberg, who's the current chair of the county party. She's also a DSA member. That just kind of goes to show you how the county party has changed. And as a result, we were able to really focus on municipals and really get some amazing people into state office as well. So just want to throw that out there that the Democratic Party, the federal Democratic Party, I know is extremely frustrating to a lot of us, but taking over your local county parties, and it's not really, it takes work, but it's not impossible. We did it with, what would you say, Coombs, about 15 really dedicated people who worked hard inside the party politics and then also doing a lot of field work during campaign cycles. So you build a reputation, you build connections with folks, you get new people engaged, and you can really turn things around in a short amount of time.
Absolutely. And our county party is a real demonstration of that, because we also have people at other levels of office that took over solidly Republican strongholds, and they may not be out and out socialists, but they are people that actually are going to put people first in their offices, in the Senate and the House at the state level. So that, I think, for me, I'm thinking most strongly about Chris Kolker and David Ortiz, who really cleaned the floor and really are not afraid to stand up for working people. So the work is 100% worth it, because it's not only about what you do, it's about the other wins that you enable through your work.
That's really important to hear, I think, because at least on the federal level, right, in heavy red or heavy blue district, I think that the electoral strategy comes down to not wanting to put too much time, energy, or effort into progressive candidates in solidly red districts because it's a waste of time. But as you are demonstrating at the local level, it's a little different. You can have a heavily red district and you can bring in a progressive candidate with strong messaging that could ultimately flip the local district that might have been historically a Republican district or a Republican seat. And that's how real change can start to happen. Whenever you have the right candidate who is willing to put in the work, the sweat equity, and lead the charge and make a promise to their constituents that there is a better way, that we don't have to settle for neoliberal policies at the local level, that with well-intended people who are willing to step up to the plate and put themselves in a position to actually better the lives of their constituents, that messaging does go a long way. And it can change the political dynamics, even at the local level. And I think a lot of people feel like even if they were to get involved, they are thinking to themselves, well, I live in a very red district and my community tends to vote more conservatively. Well, maybe it all comes down to being the prospect of change, having a theory of change that resonates with people, so much so that they are willing to even divorce themselves from their own ideological perspective or their espoused understanding as to how local politics work, that will lead to more progressive seats that transcend beyond the Democratic agenda or the Democratic messaging, like we've seen with the Justice Democrats, that has given people hope that there is an opportunity for better politics. And there are people out there who have their constituents' best interests at heart, that do lead to wide-scale change. And that really does start at the local level with DSA-endorsed candidates or other socialist candidates who are leading the charge right now. And they don't get as much national media attention. They kind of fall by the wayside, and their work often goes undetected, but it's incredibly important to pay attention to how this works, how these community-led activists do turn into local politicians, and how they make differences on the ground without getting the recognition that they deserve.
Yeah,
that's all I wanted to say. That was much better.
No, that's a good plug. Yeah, like it's not about the glory. Honestly, there's very little
right.
in this. It's just about being able to make meaningful changes in people's lives, right? Mm-hmm. And you do that, like I said, through policy changes, great and small. And Coombs, do you want to talk a little bit about your background and how you got plugged in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think politically, my background is that I started attending protests when I was like 15, because I had some really radical high school teachers that were like, yeah, hey, y'all, did you know there's a International Women's Day event that a bunch of anarchists are putting on? Y'all should go check that out. So that's how I originally got involved. And then I grew up in Denver, and we were having a lot of issues with police violence at that time. And so then I got involved with movements around ending police violence in the city of Denver, as well as some of the early Transform Columbus Day efforts, which finally led to us we were hoping it was going to be Indigenous Peoples Day, but we did at least get rid of Columbus Day and replace it with Cabrini Day this last year. So it literally, and that was, just to put some perspective in that, I started going to those protests when I was 16, and I'm now 37. So those are kind of, my engagement in politics is long, and I watched a lot of issues take a really long time to change and move the needle on. Even when people really wanted it, there wasn't always the political will. And then work-wise, my background is that I started working as a caregiver and paraprofessional when I was 19 years old for people with disabilities, and then worked in that field and continue to work in that field now on the administrative side in case management. And so I also, in my early 20s, started fighting to end our wait list for comprehensive services for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, which, because of our horrific tax policy in the state of Colorado, we have to put to a vote on the ballot. And I watched ballot initiatives to end that wait list fail in the same years that tax increases for stadiums passed. And so my politics is very informed by watching people chase capitalist gain and chase aesthetics and fun over the real nitty-gritty things that people need so that they can get by, be successful, and not suffer. And for me, the disappointment has been again and again that the people who really care stay home. And that's what really motivated me to run for office, is that I want people to see that you can and should hope, you can and should work and fight for the things you want, even if it takes a very long time for you to get them, and that every person should feel powerful and motivated to have a role in their government at every level. And so that civic engagement is a huge part of what motivates me and what has been my focus, along with, of course, economic justice and disability rights and immigrant justice, and all the things you would expect a lefty person to care about. I think that it does really come down that civic engagement and people knowing that they do have access to their government.
How much do you think channeling that inner frustration that so many people have plays a part in these new waves of candidates who are coming forward, just like Donald Trump in many respects was able to channel that energy and that anxiety that so many people have for all of the wrong reasons related to, changes in our political landscapes, changes in our own backyards, this diversity that many people are just simply not comfortable with. Donald Trump really leans into that anxiety that so many people feel, that's rooted in racism, that's rooted in white supremacy and in misogyny and Islamophobia and all the phobias, quite frankly. Do you think that this is almost an effective strategy to do the same, but on the left, to stand up and be willing to attempt to really lean into those inner frustrations that might seem like you are attempting to agitate, but for all of the right reasons? If you are agitating to get people involved or mobilized, then this could be the reason why we're seeing a little bit more participation at the local level. And do you think this is an effective way to garner support?
I think agitation is absolutely important and is a necessary part of getting people mobilized for political change. I do think you're right that there are different ways to agitate and different motives for agitation. And so I absolutely do not believe that we can engage in agitation and remain agnostic about ideology and about policy and about oppression. And I think that's where we get into dangerous territory with agitation, is when we try to just agitate people's basest impulses and do not do so with any attention toward what would be a higher goal and a higher vision. Donald Trump agitated people toward his own personal power. Mm-hmm. And I think if your focus is your personal power and you're willing to gain personal power at all costs, then you're probably going to create some pretty disastrous outcomes with that agitation. But I think if you do so with a mind toward compassion and with an anti-oppressive lens, then agitation is a necessary and important tool. And that when you are doing it, you have to constantly check yourself and be willing to be checked on whether or not you're being mindful of those issues.
Right. So it's almost necessary to follow up very quickly with agitation that you are going to take your role seriously if you are a candidate for office, right? And not losing sight that you are agitating for the benefit of offering some sort of solution to an existing problem that has yet to be resolved, right? And I totally agree with this campaign strategy, and I think that more people should really embrace this campaign strategy because I think it is highly effective. And we need people standing up for the rights and the opportunities that have fallen kind of by the wayside or have been put on the back burner that addresses, the issues that we face from a class conscious perspective, that we are willing to address economic inequality. We are addressing all of the root causes of a capitalist, racist, homophobic society and all of the other things that have led to this complacency within the Democratic Party, where, especially if you're running as a Democrat, but you are pushing further left in your policy positions, and you are leading the charge that you are not going to be a pillar in the status quo. You are not going to lay the foundation of just another milquetoast neoliberal candidacy. You are going to push beyond the bounds of what is the confines of the electoral strategy of a Democratic candidate, and you are going to do more. And I think that is important. That's a crucial element of any progressive member who is running on the Democratic Party, that you make it abundantly clear that as you are, admittedly working within the confines of the Democratic Party, your policy positions are pushing further left, and that you are looking to make meaningful change for those whose voices have gone unheard and whose needs have been unaddressed for quite some time.
Yep. I just want to add a little to that. So like Allison mentioned earlier, our friend Brian Lindstrom, who ran in Ward 6, he outperformed the Democratic Performance Index by 13 points out there. And the way he did that was taking leftist messaging. You don't use any of the scare words, obviously, and just like some people don't go out there and say I'm a conservative or I'm a fascist or whatever. You don't go out there and be like I'm a flaming liberal or I'm a socialist.
Yeah.
But you take the bread and butter issues that people really care about, and you just talk very earnestly about those. So that's what he did. He talked basically kitchen table economics. He talked about solutions for our roads. Let's look into a municipal bank. Let's look into municipal broadband. Let's raise revenue for the city without raising taxes. That kind of stuff, and like those fresh ideas. He won a lot of Republicans and a lot of conservative leaning independents out there. Because the reality is, I think people are already agitated. They all know something is amiss. And we're living in late stage capitalism, right? Our inequity and inequality are at record levels. Very few people are really insulated from that. So that's the danger of a Donald Trump, because you get a demagogue who's very charismatic in his own way, and then wants to foist all of the world's problems on illegals and whoever else. He'll just scapegoat whoever. And then tell you, well, if we build a wall, things will be good. If we go after this one specific country, everything will be okay. Or you can be like, there are too many millionaires and billionaires, and they need to pay their fair share of taxes. And talk about economic populism through a more equitable lens, and we'll end up with better results, because that really does resonate with people. And especially when you're able to point to what other municipalities have done, what other countries have done, the quality of life that other people enjoy through more left-leaning politics. That's when you win folks over. And not just that, but reaching out to the people who are really agitated, the people who are so agitated that they don't even believe in the process anymore. They don't participate. Mm-hmm. You got to go to, for us, our base was in a lot of older neighborhoods, townhomes, and apartment complexes. People who typically get completely overlooked by most mainstream Democratic, outreach strategies. They want to go to the active voters, the middle income, mostly white folks. They completely disregard folks who live in rentals and who are lower income or who are low propensity voters. And by doing that, we activated new people who typically set out of municipal elections. That's how Brian overperformed in Ward 6. And that's how Coombs and I managed to pull out, tight victories, but victories nonetheless in Ward 4 and Ward 5. Because those folks never get talked to, are definitely not conservative. There were some people there who were to the left of me, and they were like, I guess you'll do. So,
you're the compromise.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things too. We really are the compromise. If things get worse, you're going to start seeing, folks who are far more radical than us. And you're going to start seeing more stuff like what you saw with, the attempted coup yesterday on the right as well. People's material conditions are deteriorating. There is far too much stress at all levels, or there's far too much stress for people, and you can impact that in different ways at all levels of government. So it's incumbent upon us to not just build a better future, but to also, to the maximum extent possible, make people more comfortable today.
Yeah, 20-year-old Allison would think that 36-year-old Allison is a sellout just for deigning to run for office to begin with, instead of just advocating for tearing it all down. But at the same time, we push for things that are, I think, common sense. I think reasonable, basic economic policies, but that it is the compromise. I myself in the past, and plenty of people that I still am friends with, think that what we're pushing for is just not enough. And there are people that support us and have supported the policies we put forward that'll say, well, we'll support this even though it's not enough. So I do think that people need to understand people like us are the compromise. We're willing to push for bold policy that we probably can get past, hopefully, instead of just tearing the whole damn thing down. But realistically, I think a large number of our voters are currently already on the why don't we just tear it down already train.
Yeah. And just one more little thing I'll toss in there, that this messaging, I think it's a combination of the legitimacy that our movement and like folks on, with our politics have made through the Democratic, party, especially the local Democratic Party, combined with just like folks seeing people on city council like stand up to serial liars and call them out on it, not back down from that, especially when we get tone policed, and try to actually still pass like, minimum wage increases and housing solutions. I think that actually really wins people over. So like mainstream liberals will come over as well. And that's something I've noticed. So just throwing that out there for anyone who thinks that you're too far left for your city. I don't think that's true. Because we have to remember, like, the politics that Allison and I have, we are centrists virtually anywhere else in the world. It is only in America that we're considered left-wingers, because that's how far right and far gone our politics are here. Because we have a very juvenile discourse. As soon as you drop the S word or the C word, you're just, you may as well be from Mars. But like, there are elected communists and socialists and Green Party members in virtually every other democracy in the world. It's just here where we're the the aberration. So I think that pointing that out once you have that legitimacy, but also just making, running on the ideas and the policy that will help people, will not just activate new folks, but it will get conventional liberals on your team.
Yes, we definitely would not have won without conventional liberals.
Yep.
They make up the greater part of the Democratic Party. I mean, between, moderates and centrists and liberals, I mean, those are, that's the foundation of the Democratic Party. And I think it's the prospect of pushing the party as far left as fringe Republicans are pushing their party as far right as possible is what we need to really be mindful of, that we can counter this movement of pushing the Overton window so far right before we start to see the inner or the beginning stages of what would be a fascist regime in this country. And many would argue that we're already almost there. I mean, that's another reason why it's almost necessary to see these far left fringe politicians at the local level and at all levels, quite frankly, trying to counter the movement that we have seen in the Republican Party to push the Overton window as far right as possible. And I think it's great to have that capacity building proponent that is leading the charge in having the right kind of language or messaging that is resonating with the radical liberals of the Democratic Party, who we might have thought are so staunch in their positioning that they weren't willing to accept or agree with the politics of somebody who would be further left than them, right? It is a matter of, I think, capacity building and educating those who might not even understand or have acknowledged the fact that we do have a better way forward. We just have to open up our discussions and look at these issues through a leftist perspective. And it's great to see that is occurring even in your own communities where, liberals are embracing the idea of leftist policies. That might not seem to be the case at a larger scale, right? Whenever we're talking about our National Democratic Party and those who right now are trying to keep the status quo intact, I think that it is a real disservice to the local momentum that we are seeing, but eventually this could be the beginning stages of what could be pushing the Overton window back to the left. If more people are emulating these policies or emulating these campaign strategies, then ultimately it won't be so scary to imagine the Democratic Party embrace, leftist populism at a national scale.
Mm-hmm. I'll say it has, I think, changed the discourse in not just our city, but in our congressional district to some extent. And I'm not going to take credit for that, but I think that it's a combination of things. It's getting more folks active who typically don't participate in politics, combined with people in elected office who are willing to say the things that need to be said, combined with like Democratic Party leadership at the local level and House district, leadership at the local level that is willing to say the things that need to be said, that change the discourse. Because you actually have like our congressional representative now out there saying like, hey, isn't it weird that Capitol Police, during the BLM protests came out like fully militarized, and even though they knew this was going to happen with the Chud parade, they were they literally let them into the Capitol building. I want answers. And like, not the strongest way to come out on that, but frankly, it is so much better than where we were just 4 years ago here. So,
considering that just 4 years ago, our current mayor was our congressman. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And this guy's actually. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, that's the change we've had in 4 years. Is we go from Mike Kaufman to Jason Crow, who is definitely more moderate than us, but endorsed both of us and is willing to go to bat for very left candidates. So it's just in those short 4 years, by having a really small but really engaged group of people in the party and in the community, we've made huge change.
Yep. It's showing up for meetings and actually participating. Someone I really look up to, one of our county commissioners, Nancy Jackson, she said that's 90% of the battle. And then the rest of that is building good relationships with people and putting your walking shoes on and going to do like the direct work, like the canvassing, and that kind of organizing. You get more people engaged that way. You build relationships with folks who share your values. You discover people who you didn't think shared your values actually do. And when you're in there and you're espousing like these ideas that are not mainstream, and they hear that and they're like, oh, I agree with that too, or I thought that for such a long time, I've just never seen anyone else do it, so I was afraid to talk about that too. Like decommodifying housing, what, you think that's a good idea too? Like yeah. So at the very least, providing a public option for housing, right? Just building social housing, like that kind of stuff. When you talk about that, people are like, hell yeah, that's a great idea. It makes sense. And these are people who have been around in politics for like 40 years. So, yeah, just, saying that to motivate all of y'all who are watching and chatting. So, yeah, it's really, go ahead.
Just, we have some like very old guard Democrats that have been around forever that staunchly support whatever we do. Sometimes they'll be like, well, that was a little spicy. That was a little intense. But you know what? We love you guys. We trust you. And then over time, they're like, oh, you know what? That actually is really important. That's really thoughtful. That's a better idea than I've heard people have in the past. So a lot of people that you wouldn't expect to be on board will get on board, just if you have the courage to state your convictions and to lead from those convictions.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from chatters who want to get a little bit more input from our guests? Oh yes, breaking news, Trump concedes.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm skeptical. Let me pull this up.
Yeah, we'll take a moment to fact check this to see if it looks like it's coming from CBC News, so
What happened? Sorry, I had
Trump conceded.
Oh yeah, I actually saw that this morning. I did not fact check it though, because I was dealing with other stuff.
All right.
So I don't know what all truth is in that. I suspect that it's kind of a saving his hide, and or Republicans being like, no, hell no, you're screwing us over.
Yeah.
Better fix this. Not that really has bothered him in the past, but.
Yeah, because honestly, like, we're going to be dealing with the monsters that he created for a long time. I think that conservatives have become even more comfortable just bald-faced lying and creating an alternate reality, or like I think Fat Gingerbeard in chat was talking about, mouthpieces like Tucker Carlson helping to actively create an alternate reality. for people who just thrive off of confirmation bias to dwell in. And that's very dangerous because that will continue to make it impossible to actually have dialogue with people if you can't agree on what's real. So, yeah, and honestly, that's something that we see a little bit of on our council, and it's really frustrating. It mostly comes from one person, but it's still there, and it's a damn problem.
Well, and then we see it from constituents who are bolstered and buoyed by that individual on our council. We'll get emails that are basically the same lines of just completely false information backed by hateful, racist, classist rhetoric.
One question that I have, I'm interested to know whether or not you've seen, I mean, knowing that you are still pretty relatively new, if I'm understanding correctly, but have you seen anybody who is outright regurgitating or reiterating QAnon conspiracy theorist bullshit?
Yes.
In public forums?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Especially during early COVID. Holy shit. Like, we literally got into a screaming match about masks on one of our public health calls. It was ridiculous.
Whether or not they were going to make you sicker than not wearing them.
Yes. Yeah, no, there's, and also, just, God, what was it, just like 2 or 3 weeks ago, on another kind of like Denver Aurora local broadcast, the Brother Jeff show, our new mayor pro tem refused to admit that Trump lost. Like, it was just a lot of hemming and hawing and kind of like giving those conspiracy theories room to breathe. And, you know, she got very upset because I said, for fuck's sake, are you kidding me, in chat when she was on the show. And I responded to her, I was like, you need to be careful with what you say. People look up to you. And when you say things like that, you're giving these conspiracy theories more room to breathe. Fast forward, DC gets stormed yesterday because of those same conspiracy theories. So I'm not saying this was her fault, but I'm saying that contributes to the broader problem of this alternate reality that, again, circling back to Fat Gingerbeard, is like basically created by right-wing hate radio and mouthpieces like Tucker Carlson. So this Trump is gone, but the after effects are still around. And the next Trump is going to be smarter and better spoken. But that kind of heinous politics is here to stay.
Absolutely.
And
better, and I don't really have anything to add.
Yeah, sorry, and Blanco FTP, sorry, I saw this, and I want to make sure that Coombs sees this because she is the trash expert.
Yeah, I am not in fact.
Yeah, so how would we go about getting municipal trash service in Aurora? This private trash pickup is garbage.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the things that I am also really excited about. I get excited about weird and sometimes mundane issues. Realistically, it's going to be difficult, but is necessary. They recently did this in Arvada, and it took them like 10 years, including extensive public outreach. Thankfully, our director of housing and community services was in Arvada working on that trash issue. So having her around should be really helpful in that because she knows where the positive steps and missteps are. But ultimately, we're going to have to have a vote of council to support it, which is going to be difficult to get. We have to do quite a bit of research and public outreach around how we work with particularly the HOAs that tend to get positive and favorable rates from the major trash companies. But then those of us who are either in really awful HOAs, particularly condo HOAs, or outside of HOAs end up in really awful situations with respect to our trash. A large number of people in Aurora don't have access to recycling. So we have to get all of that data together, which thankfully was already started by our prior special projects manager. And it's something I will be working with folks on this year, ultimately because of the recent Tabor decision or the recent kind of Tabor-like decision, which is that now all enterprise funds also have to be put on the ballot. we are going to have to put it on the ballot. So that community outreach and public information are going to be super duper important in being able to move this forward. So we don't have an immediate solution, but we're going to be starting to work on it this year. And I think the biggest piece is public outreach. The other big piece is that actually I believe it's the Motor Carriers Association, which represents the trash haulers, including the major trash haulers, literally will come after politicians, city managers, anyone that decides to take a stand on this. And when it goes onto the ballot, they'll pour a lot of money into fighting it. So again, the biggest thing I think is community engagement and community outreach, because I heard so much from people on the doors that have 6 garbage trucks on their street in a week because of the privatized system was a frustration for them, that being unable to get consistent trash service or recycling was an issue for them. So it's something that we have to pursue. And I think that a municipalized option is likely our best option, only because a contract system, which a lot of people frame as like a happy medium, doesn't apply to any multifamily dwellings with more, or multifamily developments with more than 8 units. So I know that's a really wonky thing, but Blanco FTP, if you want to email me at acoombs@auroragov.org or text me at 720-505-3332. I'd love to talk to you about this, because it's something that I'm really committed to doing and will be working with our staff on this year.
Excellent. Okay. Y'all working on public broadband now, says a ghost.
So Juan, are you still there? Because I feel like this is the Juan conversation that has come up. He's more knowledgeable about this than I am.
Yeah, so right after we got elected, when we were meeting with our finance director and doing like the newbie council 101, I brought up 2 big policy ideas to the director, and that was, one was municipal banking, which she was kind of like, I don't know about that. I don't know, like, what, all the legality around that, and that's still in the works. We actually are waiting to hear back from the state on that. And the other was municipal broadband, and that she got really excited about, because she's like, yes, I've been, hoping that someone would talk about this. We had, basically, the city has a strategy in place to, anytime they tear up a road, so not just routine road maintenance, but when they have to relay a road, they're putting in municipally owned fiber. And the goal is to start by connecting city buildings to build like an intranet, and from there, hopefully expand out to where we're able to provide broadband service to the public. Because they, our finance director and some of the other staff members I've talked to, they agree that this is a very useful public utility to have. They're familiar with like the success that Longmont has had it with their NextLight municipally owned broadband service. It's outperformed their expectations. They thought that they'd get like 20% adoption. They had like, I think, closer to 50% adoption. So they actually refinanced the bonds to pay them off sooner, and now they're trying to figure out how they're going to spend the excess revenue that they're generating through their muni broadband. And they have, I think, the number 1, or like, if it's not number 1 anymore, it's probably like in the top 10 rated service in the country. So, and Longmont is a town that's about, I think, the third of our size, Coombs, right? Something like that. I think they're about 100,000 people. So it's awesome that they got that rolling. So I'm hoping that Aurora can be the first in the closer to Metro Denver to do that. It would be a huge benefit for our residents and also our businesses. And God, I wish we had gigabit fiber readily available, especially now during the Rona, for folks, because we've had so many people who have been, working remotely but dealing with crappy internet service. Even some of our colleagues, like, they'll drop out in the middle of a council meeting because their CenturyLink or their Comcast craps out on them. So yeah, I think that that's a huge win for us. We just need to get there, and it'll take a little bit because we're a huge sprawling city at that, but it's definitely in the works.
We also had a committee meeting that almost got canceled, and one of the items got completely postponed because everyone's Comcast in our whole part of the metro region was messed up for some reason that they did not tell us why.
Yep.
So yes, we need this.
Hell yeah. Are there any other questions? Good forward thinking with laying fiber, says OG Prodigy. That is a really creative solution.
Yep. No. Honestly, our city staff. One of the things that I think we both learned over the last year is that we have amazing, dedicated public servants, very thoughtful people who, frankly, just need council members with vision to unlock their creative potential. So that's why, again, these ideas that we're talking about here, if that resonates with y'all should run for office, because I guarantee you, most of the time, your local officials are not even thinking about this stuff. So
and are not listening to your city staff, and they do bring it up. But it is interesting because our staff also, though many of them are very wonderful in a council manager form of government, they can just completely get in the way and shut your stuff down through back.
Also that.
And so that's something that I have learned, is that you really have to anticipate the role of staff. And if you are an activist that doesn't want to run for office for any reason, learning who your city staff are and asking for meetings with them can be a really helpful way to get your issues addressed, because then they can go to a council member that they know is interested and say, hey, so someone came to me with this, would you want to come meet with them and start working on it? So if you are interested in running for office, also start getting to know your city staff, because if you know them when you come in, it can be really beneficial to having resources to work on your issues.
Yep. Yeah, I'll say personally that was a bit of a challenge for me, because I only knew really our homeless outreach coordinator. I didn't know any of the other folks, and we've gotten to know them over the course of the year. And we butt heads sometimes, but generally speaking, I feel like they're mostly helpful. So.
I mean, I think that's true. It's just whenever you're looking at a policy, I think you have to be aware that staff who are around longer than any of the council members can really shut down or interfere with your work through those back channels, or even by just not prioritizing something in a meeting or things like that. So there's a lot of those dynamics that you have to be aware of. But I agree, our staff are a great resource. They're very knowledgeable, and for the most part, really just want to get good things done and are open to new ways of making that.
Yep.
Do you think that there needs to be a little bit more attention focused on coalition building or partnerships between local governments and activist organizations and nonprofits that would ultimately shine a light on the need to address some of these issues by way of policy solutions? And how would you envision this going forward as a way to maybe restructure the local governmental model to include room for local activism to be parts of the coalition building process?
Absolutely. Co-governance is one of the main issues of Colorado People's Alliance and Colorado People's Action, which Juan and I are both members of and have been since before we were in office. And I think that it's an idea that is still continuing to be developed as far as what that looks like. But it definitely does mean that elected officials should be sitting down with these organizations and talking about what kinds of policy goals they have and how we can work on writing that policy with them. And I do think that COPA, Colorado People's Alliance, has been really good at that at both the local and state level. So if folks are not aware of People's Action National or COPA, if you're local, I think that that's a really good model. Because they do build relationships with lawmakers and provide resources and work together on mobilizing people to get policy passed. And I think that that's a model that I really value, is that actually sitting down in the policy drafting process with those community organizations. As far as a structural way for that to work within cities, I think that having folks that are part of those organizations sit on some of the city's committees and boards and commissions, which most cities have, would be a really valuable way to get connected and advance policy goals.
So it could just be a matter of having a vested interest in getting organizers in those positions that are available, right, at that commissioner level. It sounds as though some of the infrastructure has already been laid at the state level in Colorado, which is great. And it's just a matter of continuing to build this foundation that would abridge this gap between local government and activism in a more maybe comprehensive, cohesive way. So it sounds like you're well on your way to maybe establishing some sort of long-standing rapport, or maybe potential long-standing rapport that would make all of the difference in the policy-making process, which is great. That's, I think, what we need to start shifting to is a model that works for everyone, that allows for that communication to exist between local nonprofits and activists, directly corresponding with policymakers who are in positions of power to kind of implement those policies.
Absolutely. And again, I think we need to do more work on building up infrastructure for co-governing. And Juan, it sounds like you had something you wanted to add.
Absolutely. I just wanted to add that in addition to People's Action and Colorado People's Action, that's why the DSA is also very important. Because really, like my theory of change for like long-standing and continuing, I guess, change, can't quite think of the word that I was looking for, but is dual power. And that doesn't mean that you just run people for office and expect them to just do all the work after the fact and you go to brunch. That means that you continue to organize with your neighbors. You continue to do deep canvassing, which is like not even when like someone's going to be on the ballot. You just go door to door, get to know your neighbors, get to know like what is happening in their life, what they care about, what they'd like to see happen, and you stay in touch. And I think it helps to be a member of these communities, these community groups, so that you never lose touch with what's happening in your city. You can be as proactive as possible to address a lot of these things, and you can help empower community and build like a bench of local activists who become experts, on these subjects, or even find people to, run when you're done, because none of us are going to be here forever. I don't want to be in this seat forever. We need to build a long-standing bench so that our movement is sustainable over the long term. It can't just be a flash in the pan. It can't be a moment. So, yeah, that's why. So I really love you bringing up that kind of like co-governance discussion, because it's vital to everything we're doing on the left. The right can just fund their special interest groups and candidates and just call it a day, because they're going to do what they get their marching orders to do. But we have to organize differently on the left. We have the people, they have the money. So we need to build our resource, which is people.
Right, exactly. My personal question is, are you interested in maybe looking to implement a tenant bill of rights, if that would be something that would be possible in the absence of a citywide tenant union in Aurora, Colorado? Let me put myself back in because I can't hear y'all. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I am super interested in tenant unions also, but I would definitely be interested in a tenant bill of rights as well.
I think the reason why I asked about a tenant bill of rights, and I don't want to seem as though I am going beyond or stepping on the toes of a tenant union, I think that we are seeing that without having the political agency that tenants obviously aren't going to have, it will require a little bit of government intervention, even at the local level, where you have representatives who are at the behest of tenants, because tenants do not have power, and it's incredibly difficult to see them build their own tenant power. Even in places like LA, where you have a tenant union, a very active tenant union that is working tirelessly to build tenant power in their communities. I almost wonder if this is one of the one of the instances where government intervention is required in order to offer any semblance of power to tenants, because it's such a disproportionate power dynamic already between tenants and landlords, that maybe it is necessary to offer tenant rights to those who are renting, because they will not be able to build their own power otherwise.
And I do think we have a little bit of, I don't know how to explain it, like bureaucratic or legal stumbling blocks because of our state law. Certainly in relation to any type of rent control that could be implemented through a tenant's Bill of Rights. In some senses, what we would do would have to be more symbolic initially, while we keep fighting at the state level to overturn some of the really horrific landlord-tenant laws that we do have as a state. But I agree. I think that we have to make sure that people have rights around their housing. And in Colorado, in general, we've been chipping away at that issue way too slowly. 9 to 5 Colorado and Colorado People's Alliance have both done a lot of work on those issues. But it's what we still have in place that they have not been able to fight successfully is pretty abysmal.
Yeah, I'll just echo that existing state law really is a major hurdle for us to do a lot of that. I would strongly be in support, but I think that we should explore things like, I think it was newer, Boulder, where they recently just passed basically a just cause just cause eviction law. So if you are getting evicted, you are entitled to legal representation. And that's going to yield, I think, much better outcomes for their residents over there, if it's any indication as to what else has happened in other places that have done this. And that was actually, I think, spearheaded by Boulder DSA, and one of my constituents and good friend who I'm still hoping to get you in touch with. I just haven't heard back from him. Okay. Jason Legg, who's an attorney here who works on housing issues. He was a major contributor to that effort. So, yeah.
Excellent. I think it's really important to just kind of harp on the fact that a lot of existing state and local laws give way too much power to landlords in general because of how the law favors property owners, which is a major pillar of our Constitution. It's what the forefathers had in mind whenever they were offering power to some, but not all, individuals in this country. And the legacy of disproportionate power to landowners is a major pillar of our country, in which our country was built upon. So of course, there is going to be a legacy of giving disproportionate power to landholders and landlords that I think, which again, I kind of mentioned at the beginning, but I'll go ahead and reiterate one last time, makes it really difficult to find a way forward to give power back to tenants, right? And it is a very incremental process, and one minor victory is still a victory. So even if it is just, a ballot initiative that gives tenants free legal representation in the event that they are experiencing eviction, is a win in my mind. But I do think that we have to continue to find ways to offer more rights to tenants. And I think it can be a really intimidating process, just like it's intimidating to join a union in your workplace. It is equally intimidating to join a union in your building, a tenant union, because in the minds of both your landlord and your employer, it is an act of defiance, even if it is you protecting yourself or giving yourself some sort of agency that would not be offered to you otherwise, because your employer and your landlord are banking on you having as little power as possible. It's a requirement almost to allow them to continue to uphold their own capital interests. And I think that in and of itself might shake tenants in a way that might ultimately push them away from the idea of joining a union, if that could mean that a landlord would get out in front of you and evict you ahead of time, right? That same fear of being fired by joining a union in your workplace, I think is echoed in the same sentiment as being evicted by joining a tenant union, right? So it's the fact that I think a lot of people are dissuaded from protecting themselves, and that is something that I don't think will go away, even if there are tenant or there are rights like there are in New York to join a tenant union. I almost feel as though it would be better, and it would cast a large enough nets by having these laws implemented at even a local level that would give tenants automatic rights and protections that they otherwise would have to accumulate through tenant union organizing, right?
Absolutely. And I think that in some ways, tenant union organizing is more scary in the very housing unstable situation that a lot of people are in.
Yes.
Most of our housing is actually much less stable and reliable than our employment because of both the awful laws we have in place and the exorbitant costs of housing that people face in comparison to their income. And so, yeah, I absolutely think that there's that fear, and that fear is very legitimate and probably harder to overcome because of that power differential. And yeah, again, having protective laws in place is essential. I know Councilmember Marcano, or Juan, I don't know why I called you that, and I have talked about, I feel like I'm in committee all of a sudden, and I'm like, Councilmember Marcano and I have discussed that we need to have licensing requirements for our landlords, because right now a lot of our landlords get away with so much horrific stuff because we don't have any kind of licensing requirements for them. So they do what they want. And it's really hard to have oversight over habitability issues. And it's hard without legal representation for community members to bring claims around habitability issues. And it's hard for our code enforcement to do what they need to do to protect people. So that's a both revenue source and accountability mechanism that we've discussed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Going back to like that landlord registry, that's how Boulder was able to get their no evictions without representation bill through, because they already had that as like a framework to tie that into. So in the state legislature this year, they're looking at overturning some of the hurdles, not all of them, unfortunately, between that stand between us and being able to like regulate housing and improve tenant rights. And I'm hoping that they can actually get that through, because we do have a Democratic trifecta with some fairly progressive, freshman legislators. So with that done, we'll be able to, I think, have more leeway to do these kinds of things. Because I strongly support like encouraging tenants unions. Because the reality of the situation is, and you all know this, but I'll say it anyway, it's that we live under tyranny in the workplace. Unless you own your own workplace, you are always at the mercy of your employer. And the same thing is true when housing. You are always at the mercy of your landlord unless you own your home. And then you're at the mercy of banks, and that's a whole nother issue. But and we need to change that dynamic. So just like we need to increase labor power, we need to increase tenant power. And Colorado is an exceptionally landlord-friendly state, and that needs to change.
Most states are, unfortunately. What are your thoughts on housing co-ops or trying to find a way for the government to expropriate vacant lots or buildings by way of exercising eminent domain, to maybe move to a new model for housing altogether that would not rely heavily on private property ownership, but instead shared communal spaces that would work for more people in the long run as well?
I'll let Juan start on this, because I know he has a lot of thoughts.
Perfect.
My thoughts.
Yeah. So yes, the best example of how to build more communal space and to frankly work to decommodify housing is social housing. And I shared the link that you shared out with Vienna being the example there. That's an example that I have looked to for a couple of years now. And really, there's nothing stopping us from starting on that same path here, aside from political will and money. But we just need to have some budget discussions and see if we can reprioritize some things. I think there is opportunity to do that. And, I think it needs to be an issue in the coming election because, no matter how much our mayor and our conservative colleagues want to say, like, the market is unable or unwilling to satisfy the needs of people in this city and in this country.
I am willing to go toe-to-toe with any neoliberal who tries to state
Absolutely.
that it is a market-based solution in addressing the affordability crisis in
Nope,
our
that
housing
is
market.
no. If that were the case,
there are no good ones.
yeah. If that were the case, we already have more empty homes than homeless people in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Housing should be basically on a fire sale. That is not the reality that we live in. It is an inelastic good, however much, free market fundamentalists want to say it's an elastic good, you always have choice. No, this is caused because of capitalism and treating housing and other essential human needs as commodities. I mean, just honestly, the same is true with homelessness, tying it back to how we started this conversation. Homelessness is a byproduct of capitalism. You treat people as commodities. Yeah, you treat people as commodities, you commodify housing, you commodify every aspect of your life, or of people's lives, basically, and you wonder why there are folks who literally have nothing. They basically fail out of the game. It's just, this isn't a board game, this isn't Monopoly, it's real fucking life. And it doesn't have to be this way. We can choose to have a better society. All we have to do is just realize the rules don't work for people, and change them. That's it. But some people would stand to lose money, and that's why we don't.
Absolutely. And I would just add that obviously one of those things that is so very wrong in our capitalist society that produces homelessness is our healthcare system, or our lack of appropriate healthcare. When people are experiencing illness and it costs so much for them to take care of that they lose their homes, when people cannot afford access to the mental health care that would enable them to continue to lead good lives. And also when they are treated like things instead of beings with needs, that creates a lot of unmet mental health needs that then can lead to trauma, addiction, etc. I would argue that living under late stage capitalism is fundamentally traumatizing. So it's surprising that more of us are not completely addicted to drugs and living in encampments on the basis of that trauma. But also, most of us are addicted to a lot of things that just don't interfere with our lives to the point that we lose our housing. But then I also wanted to just mention that when Juan says political will is in the way and money, the lack of political will is the reason for the lack of money available. There is not a lack of money available. It's about where we allocate those funds, and where we allocate those funds is absolutely an issue of political will.
Absolutely. Well said. And that is why y'all need to run for office.
Exactly.
Yes. And harass the shit out of your elected officials.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to say that running for office isn't the only solution. It is a very important one if we're actually going to use the bourgeois state to our advantage as much as possible. But we need to get more active because, like I said, dual power. Right. That's part of the co-governance that Allison was talking about. We need to build power inside and outside of the state if anything's going to change.
And
Absolutely.
I think
that cannot be underscored enough. That even if you're not in office and you don't ever want to run for office, your engagement in politics at the local level is essential.
I love that. All right. I don't know if I have any other questions. Chat, do you have any other questions that you would like to ask while we're here? We also need a leftist platform that can combat right-wing messaging. Oh, so what do you think is the best way to offer a left-leaning version of Parler?
So
platform.
God, honestly,
political platform. But okay.
Oh, maybe that's what they mean. But we already have a lot of those platforms. That's the whole thing. That's why that went right over my head, because we have a lot of left-leaning platforms like Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, and a homes guarantee that have been adopted and addressed by Bernie Sanders and other progressive and leftist candidates. So it's not like we are lacking in a platform or effective messaging. We have seen great success from the likes of Bernie Sanders, and then progressive members of Congress, and on down to the local level, who have run strong leftist campaigns. So I'm sorry if I misunderstood what you were talking about, because I would argue that a lot of those platforms already exist and have been quite effective in campaigns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Partially, though, we have too many. Like, I'm immediately thinking about the People's Platform, which I think was signed on by Working Families Party and COPA and several other organizations here. But I think a lot of times we work splintered instead of really, truly in coalition. Mm-hmm. And so that messaging isn't always clear and consistent, and that does definitely get in the way sometimes.
I would agree that you have a lot of silos that keep in different and fractured messaging from those siloed endeavors that do make it difficult to find a cohesive strategy or message that one can kind of follow, especially if there is a couple cooks currently in the kitchen who are trying to find ways to offer some sort of strategy or solution that might make it hard to kind of follow, if that makes sense. Because you have, at a more broader scale, if you think about what we're seeing right now with, the Justice, I would say the best example that I'm coming up with is like the Justice Democrats and the Progressive Coalition that is getting built out right now in the Democratic Party, and then the new party, that Jimmy Dore's party. Which might be a joke, but it's kind of like the rising of a new idea of third-party representation that would take away from the momentum that we're seeing in the Democratic Party's progressive caucus or progressive wing. That kind of is like my go-to example, where you have these different kind of messaging that ultimately could have the same end goal, right? If the end goal is to offer better policy proposals that ultimately get signed into law, right? If that is the end all be all, then the way of going about reaching those policy goals are different, and these two very different strategies, right? But whether it be third party representation or build out a new wing of the Democratic Party that ultimately could lead to a new consensus in the Democratic Party and push the Overton window back to the left.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's also an issue, and I'm sorry, Juan, I know you're.
Oh, no, you're good. Go ahead.
I just want to point out that there's also the fact that many parts of the Democratic Party's actual platform are very progressive, but there's not any methodology for holding Democrats accountable to the party platform. And so I think that's another problem we have, is not necessarily a problem of messaging. It's a problem of, pardon my language, but half-assery, where people become members of parties that have very far left platforms, but then aren't really committed to those platforms.
And I also want to add that, I share a lot of people's frustration with the Democratic Party, but given just the electoral systems as they stand, I am actually a big believer in entryism. We need to actually get people elected to then change the rules so that you can actually have a multi-party system. Like, you need to have ranked choice voting. You need to have proportional representation, if you can even get, that far. And unless we do that, all these third parties that we can imagine all the third parties we want to, but they're going to be just as effective as the Green Party. They're not going to get anywhere. They're going to just waste a lot of time and resources, especially if you completely ignore the local level. You need to actually have some kind of institutional legitimacy before you try to run at the state or federal level. And it looks like Fat Ginger Beard was talking about media platforms as well, and I'll just say that Twitch, I think we don't need to make our own echo chamber. I think that's really cool and useful if you want to radicalize people in a negative way. That's why Parler is so openly fascist, and why I think the FBI, if they actually ever do their job, is going to have an absolute field day with it. But just go where everyone else is. So it's kind of like, instead of taking the ball and creating your own party right now and not having any effect, take over your local Democratic Party and go to Twitter and take over Twitter, and go to Twitch and take over that, and go to Facebook and take over that. Go to where everyone else is at. You'll reach more people and be more effective.
I'm going to defer to Juan on that because I'm not sufficiently online.
All right, can we hear thoughts on STVR problem or disincentivizing development of high-cost luxury housing as the only development happening? I guess you kind of touched on that a little earlier.
Yeah, what is STVR? I'm not familiar with that acronym offhand.
Oh, I thought it was specifically for you, and it was like an existing program, STVR.
When I look at that, I'm thinking like single transferable something. Like, I don't know what that is.
Short-term vacation vacation rental,
Oh,
like Airbnb.
Airbnbs and stuff.
Oh.
God, all of us were like, what?
Yeah, and actually,
that's bad.
That's not an acronym I'm familiar with, but now I am. So you learn something every day. But in Aurora, that's actually something I've heard a lot of people express a lot of concerns about. I know in Denver, they technically have a law that you have to live in a rental in order to use it for Airbnb and other things like that. But I've also heard that there's no real enforcement. And frankly, I don't know what enforcement would look like for that would be effective. I think it does create an illusion that we have a real appetite for this luxury housing because people do use it for those types of rentals. I think part of that is why we need to have actually more control at the local level about what kind of development occurs and not allow such predatory development agreements, because that's something that we have consistently done over time, is just enable developers to do whatever the hell they want with no accountability to community. And so community benefit agreements and other types of restrictions are things that I really want to negotiate with our developers, because they know they need the votes to pass the housing. So even if the official policy can't be enforced, we can put pressure on them to A, not just build luxury, and B, to do things differently and offer community benefits.
Agree. I do think that it comes down to, those who are assuming positions as regulators in their city to see the disadvantages of these short-term rental agreements or Airbnbs that are causing multitudes of issues at a local level. That includes taking away the opportunity for shelter to low-income communities. I know that's a huge issue here in Los Angeles. Driving up the costs of housing as a whole. That's also an incredibly popular outcome of Airbnb. So I know that here in Los Angeles, some of the resolutions that have been passed that haven't been enforced is to limit the ownership of Airbnbs that can be put on the Airbnb website that would require its own process of licensing to those with one unit or one house that would be considered their primary unit that they can rent out, which limits the total number of units that you could buy with the intention of doling them out on Airbnb. The problem is that, and we talked about this, so I'm sorry if this is all just me reiterating something that we went over, but the mayor's office, Eric Garcetti, put a halt on the enforcement of issuing fines to those who were breaking the law and having more than one Airbnb that did not go through the process of licensing, that were on the website, some of those in rent-controlled buildings. So instead of offering a lease to low-income households, some of these rent-stabilized units were put on the Airbnb website that was making, and that could otherwise go to a low-income community member in Venice Beach and other areas that have rent stabilization laws. Basically, the reason why Eric Garcetti's office said to put a hold on this and the planning department had complied with Eric Garcetti was because they were worried about the loss of revenue from lodging taxes, right? Because they were getting a chunk of some of that money through Airbnb as well. And so you kind of see that a local city, a municipality is looking at their own bottom line. They are operating like they are a private corporation, and they are putting their own revenue sources ahead of the needs of addressing the issues of high costs of housing and what Airbnb as a whole is doing to their local housing market, right? So it is a really serious issue, and it's a shame that, you know, where Airbnb is the most destructive, there is a lack of political will in enforcing those already existing laws, because municipalities are worried about how regulating Airbnb could hurt their own city budget. And I don't know if that's helpful or hurtful, but the need is to enforce these regulations and to make sure that you are doing right by those who are most impacted by Airbnb, and that's not happening, at least in Los Angeles.
It has been something that I've heard a lot of complaints about, tying back to issues with HOAs, because what a lot of, like in my community, in my ward, a lot of our HOAs are unable to get quorums at their meetings because so many of the homes are not actually owned by people who live in them. They are investment properties. Some of those are just more traditional renters, but others are Airbnbs. In fact, up in Ward 2, where a lot of the new construction is coming in kind of closer to the airport, those homes are also just being built and then bought by investors and used as Airbnb properties.
Right.
I know this because my family, I've had family members come into town several times, and they're always able to find the same home up there to rent out as an Airbnb. So that's not what you want to see happening, because it's going to artificially inflate the price of real estate, because it's like a simulated demand. People aren't actually living in those. It's just being used as another source of revenue for people. And in general, like, I don't think we need to be promoting more landlordism. If we're actually going to address the housing crisis that we're in, that predates COVID, we need to ensure that, like, homes are actually going to people who plan to utilize them,
right,
as opposed to just be an investment vehicle. And in terms of lodger's tax, and I'll turn it over to you here, Coombs, do you know if we collect lodger's tax from Airbnbs? I don't remember that. I think we do, but I just don't remember offhand.
I think we do if they know that they're Airbnbs. There is a requirement for registration, but again, it's not like people follow every single rule that carefully, and I'm not honestly sure how our tax and licensing office work, like what they do to make sure that those properties are getting the licensing that they need. Again, I've heard in Denver that doesn't always happen, that people skirt those regulations. So I know that we're supposed to, but I don't know that we successfully do, as a result of people just kind of blowing off the need to register and be licensed.
This is a really good scenario-based question. How would you go about rendering that kind of absentee investment property ownership illegal / actively impossible?
So we've talked, and I'll again let Juan pick up on this, about vacancy taxes. That if you're owning a property that you don't live in, or not taxes, but fees that you don't live in the full year, that then in the time that you're not living there, that you pay additional fees. But Juan, if you want to weigh in on different ways that may work, this is more an area of expertise for you than me.
Yeah, honestly, the most effective vehicle that I've seen you already hit on, which is a vacancy fee. But the issue with that is that you run into the same issue with Airbnbs, where if you don't know that a property is being utilized as an Airbnb, you don't get to collect that lodger's tax. If you don't know that a property is vacant, because it's just an empty investment property, you aren't able to levy those fees. So the enforceability is a little tricky. But in scenarios where you're able to actually enforce that, I think it's the most effective way to strongly disincentivize property being used as an investment as opposed to being used for utility. And just a little rhetorical argument there, because I can imagine some folks are going to, who are more capitalist inclined are going to be like, well, then you're interfering with the market and you're going to ruin people's investments and stuff. It's important to note that Adam Smith, who is considered the father of capitalism, did not like landlords. He actually wrote a whole thing about the, landlords, like most other men, like to reap what they never sowed, and went on to, waxing rhetorically about how that's actually antithetical to, the goals of a capitalist economy. So, and Marx actually thought that capitalism was going to undo landlords. And it never did. Landlords just basically became nestled into the armpit of capitalism. And there's actually an inherent conflict, rather, between business owners, and landlords as well. But for whatever reason, they seem to conspire against workers anyway.
Right.
But yeah, so there is a rhetorical angle you can take, especially if you serve with a bunch of philosophy lords on that. But it's just really just have to make the case that, I understand that someone's grandparents might have an investment property and that's what they use to supplement their retirement income because they, get pennies from Social Security and maybe the market tanked and their 401k exploded and they have no real other recourse. There's a lot of issues that we need to fix, and I think this is one where we're going to need federal help on, because it kind of circles back to decommodification. But yeah, it's a tangled web that we have woven for ourselves, and it's going to take a bit of intentional, intention on not just the local level but also with our Congress folks to undo this mess.
I just want to throw in very briefly, as the former philosophy PhD candidate, that most people either lie about or misunderstand what Adam Smith said anyway.
Yeah, true.
We won't go into the. I think we get a few pro landlord chatters in here, or at least landlord apologists here, and I think it comes down to being what I like to call temporarily embarrassed landlords who see the benefit of one day buying up their own property and capitalizing off of the passive income that comes along with, the investment of any property, whether it be a single unit or a multifamily building. And I think it's a matter of, just addressing this at, like Juan said, at a federal level where we find ways to not only decommodify housing, but disincentivize the appeal of owning property, because we know that there is so much money to be made in real estate investment, right? And if there wasn't as much money that could be made, if we address the profit motive and we tried to diminish if we attempted to diminish the profit motive associated with landlordism, would it be as appealing to those who have access to liquid capital or some sort of, leverage that they could use in making their investment? And I think if there was less money to be made in landlordism altogether, then we wouldn't have as many temporarily embarrassed landlords that we do.
Yeah, and I think if we just made it illegal to have real estate investment trusts, that would go a long way. I don't know if that's possible, but
yeah, I don't know if that's either.
I mean, I don't know if you
or
know
at the
this.
very least, set up a real estate investment trust that's publicly owned, so that you basically just fund public housing that way. But
the real estate market is tied intrinsically to our general market system at this point. I think overall, since it is so incredibly lucrative, the entire residential real estate market as a whole it amounts to $33.5 trillion, which is the reason why it is so hard to find some sort of solution in limiting the amount of money that can be made in the real estate market, trying to find a way to drive down the cost of land in the real estate market, whether it be residential or commercial space. So whenever we're talking about it, I think that's why some neoliberals like to come in and be like, you dumb leftist, you don't even understand. No, the thing is that I do understand. I do understand how lucrative this market is. It doesn't mean that we don't try to find a solution, and that we find a way to offer equitable solutions to those who need housing policy the most, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think we also have a problem with neoliberals in general, wherein there's a view that economic arguments or practical arguments as far as the current existing system override moral arguments about what we should create and what we can envision.
Right.
So I think that's the fight that we have with those folks.
Yeah, and that just heavily constrains your policy horizon, and there you go. That explains the world we live in.
Excellent. Do we have any other questions from the chat? Amy, I was reported, I don't know if you know this, but I was reported, a landlord threatened to report me for landlord discrimination for this very
I was.
Were you?
Yeah, I listened to your show quite a bit, and like, I think I said this before on here, but like Twitch is basically like my millennial talk radio,
Yeah.
And when I'm doing something else, I'm usually listening to you or another creator, and like, yeah, I heard that whole saga.
Wow.
But yeah, they can die mad about it.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Your channel got reported, or you yourself got?
Yes.
I don't understand.
It was
Our
just
channel.
somebody threatened to report my channel for landlord discrimination, which is hilarious in and of itself.
Blanco, and this is a question for you, I think, Coombs. Why have public restrooms at Wheel Park closed? They're locked due to vandalism, but have been for at least a year. Skate park restrooms will always have graffiti. I feel like they're just trying to make it inconvenient to the folks who hang out there. Because Wheel Park's in Ward 5, right? It's like right on the border. But
I don't know, and I have not heard about that, but I will submit a council request. If you want to email me, I will be able to copy you on that request, but I'll submit it anyway, because I was not aware. I've been a little bit in the house a lot during COVID. So I'll look into that, but I don't know the answer.
Yep. I just dropped your email into chat, so.
Thank you.
Yes.
Excellent. Any other questions before we... Oh, we've been going at this for a pretty long time. Thank you so much.
We have.
I know that you had just wrapped up, and I think that you have something else planned after this, so I don't want to keep you for too much longer.
Yeah, no, it's been super fun.
I don't think that... Well,
yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, if there are no other questions, then I will go ahead and thank you both for your time, and hopefully we can do this again whenever it's convenient for you. I really appreciate taking the time out of your schedules. I know that you're busy working on, making your city a better place. So
doing what we can.
Thanks so much again.
Absolutely, yeah, let's try doing what we can.
All right, that being said, I'm going to go ahead and move back to my full screen. Thank you all so much again for coming on, and we'll talk soon. Allison Coombs and Juan Marcano, everyone. Thank you so much.
All right, take care. See you in chat.
Have a good night.